Daniel stepped into the familiar coffee shop, breathing in the rich, comforting scent of roasted beans. It had been a long day, and this was his sanctuary, a place where he and Anna had shared countless mornings, afternoons, and quiet moments together. He hadn't expected to find anyone here at this late hour. Just a coffee to reset, a brief escape before heading home. But then, a laugh, a bright, infectious laugh pierced his thoughts. A sound that was as familiar as it was unexpected. His heart leapt, recognizing Anna's voice. She was here, but with someone else. Daniel's gaze shifted, finally locating her in the far corner, draped over a stranger in a well-tailored suit. They were leaning in close, Anna's hand resting lightly on the man's arm, her face radiant with a kind of joy Daniel hadn't seen in ages. For a moment, he couldn't move. The scene felt surreal, as if he'd stumbled into someone else's life. His fingers clenched, nails biting into his palms. This wasn't just a stranger. It was his Anna, in the space that had once been theirs. The laugh that had once belonged to him, now freely given to another. Daniel remained frozen, his body a tense silhouette against the warm glow of the cafe. Time seemed to slow down, stretching unbearably as he watched his wife brush a lock of hair behind her ear, leaning in closer to the stranger across from her. The man, a polished figure in a fitted blazer, exuding confidence and charm, whispered something to Anna, and she responded with another laugh, her fingers resting momentarily on his hand. A slow, seething anger began to rise within Daniel, curling up from his gut and pressing heavily against his chest. He could hardly believe the intimacy he was witnessing, the subtle touches, the way Anna looked at this man, the easy laughter she shared with him. It was as if their marriage, their years together, meant nothing. Here she was, in the one place that held so much of their shared history, treating it like some anonymous meeting ground. He felt a sharp pain in his hand and realized he was clenching his fist so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Anna still hadn't noticed him. To her, he was invisible, just another faceless figure in the background. Daniel felt a bitter smile pull at the corner of his lips. How ironic, he thought. For years he had come here with her, treating this cafe like a little world they had built together. Now, she acted as if he didn't even exist. He couldn't stay hidden any longer. With steady, purposeful steps, Daniel moved across the room, navigating through the scattered tables, until he stood just a few feet away from Anna and her companion. For a moment, neither of them looked up. Anna was mid-sentence, her hand lifting to gesture animatedly as she continued some story. Her eyes sparkled, and she looked younger, somehow lighter. He had always loved that about her, the way her laughter could light up a room. But now, it only felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Finally, she noticed the shadow standing over her. Anna's laughter faltered as she looked up, her eyes meeting Daniel's. For a heartbeat, her expression remained neutral, as if struggling to recognize him in this context. Then, realization dawned by a flicker of panic that she couldn't quite conceal. "Daniel." Her voice wavered, and she straightened, pulling her hand away from the strangers as though burned. The man beside her looked confused, glancing between them with a wary curiosity. "Anna." Daniel's tone was quiet, but there was a sharp edge to it, a restraint that barely held back the storm beneath. "I didn't expect to find you here." He let his gaze linger on the table, 2 coffee cups, a plate with the remains of a shared pastry. Small, intimate details that made his stomach twist. Anna opened her mouth as if to explain, but no words came. Her eyes darted toward her companion, seeking an answer he couldn't give. The stranger, attempting a smooth recovery, extended a hand. "You must be Daniel," he said, an attempt at politeness that only fueled Daniel's anger. "I'm Mark." Ignoring the outstretched hand, Daniel's eyes remained fixed on Anna. "So, this is how you spend your evenings?" His words were laced with sarcasm, his jaw tight. "Laughing over coffee with friends?" Anna's face flushed. She tried to gather her composure, offering a faint, shaky smile that only added to his resentment. "Daniel, it's not what you think." "Really?" he interrupted, voice low but dangerously calm. "Then please enlighten me, Anna. Explain to me what I'm seeing right now." Anna swallowed, her face paling under Daniel's steely gaze. Her fingers fumbled with the edge of her napkin, her composure cracking under his intense scrutiny. The stranger, Mark, glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable yet unwilling to excuse himself. It was as if he couldn't resist the drama unfolding, like he was some observer watching a scene play out on a stage. "Daniel," Anna began, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't plan for you to, I didn't think." "You didn't think I'd find out," he finished, his tone sharp, every syllable like a knife. "Or that I'd notice. That I'd care." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, his jaw clenched so tightly he could feel it ache. Mark cleared his throat, attempting to insert himself into the moment. Listen, maybe we should all take a step back here. There's clearly some tension, but… Daniel cut him off with a glance so cold that it silenced him instantly. You have no idea, Mark. The sarcasm in Daniel's voice was palpable, as if he were speaking to a child trying to meddle in grown-up matters. He turned his focus back to Anna. I just wonder how long has this been going on? Our sanctuary, he gestured around the cafe, did it mean anything to you? Anna's lips parted as if to respond, but shame flickered in her eyes. She was trapped, caught in the web of her own deception, and for once there was no charm, no laugh, no excuse to save her. Daniel felt a pang of satisfaction at seeing her so vulnerable, yet it mingled painfully with the love he still felt for her, making it even harder to keep his emotions in check. Daniel, please, she finally managed, her voice a thin thread. This isn't how I wanted you to find out. How considerate of you, he replied, each word laced with bitter irony. I'm sure you had a much neater plan, didn't you? Some way to keep your double life intact. His gaze shifted to Mark, who now looked less confident, his expression faltering as he became acutely aware of the fallout surrounding him. Anna's voice wavered. It wasn't, I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. His laughter was harsh, hollow. Is that supposed to make it better? He took a deep breath, struggling to control the storm churning inside him. Tell me, Anna, how many times have you met him here, at our cafe? She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Her silence spoke louder than words. For a moment Daniel just stared, struggling to process the image before him. Anna, the woman he'd shared his life with, now reduced to this sad, awkward figure who could barely look him in the eye. He felt a wave of disgust mixed with heartbreak, as if the entire foundation of his life was crumbling before him. The silence grew thick, pressing down on them until it was nearly unbearable. Then, quietly, Daniel leaned in. You know, I came here tonight for a quiet coffee, just a small break from the chaos. And instead I find this. His gaze swept between Anna and Mark. Is this what you wanted, Anna? Or was this just convenient? She flinched, her voice almost inaudible. Daniel, I'm sorry. His expression softened for a brief, flickering moment, as if her apology had chipped away at the wall he'd built around himself. But it didn't last. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too raw. You know what? He said, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. Save it? Anna's eyes filled with tears as Daniel's words hit her. She glanced at Mark, but he looked away, clearly realizing this confrontation was no longer his to intrude upon. The stranger's sudden awkwardness did little to soothe the churning guilt in her stomach. She had imagined 100 ways to confront her unhappiness, 100 excuses to explain her actions. But now, faced with Daniel's cutting silence, every excuse she'd crafted dissolved, leaving only shame. Daniel straightened, crossing his arms in front of his chest, his expression hardened. I always wondered, he began, his voice cold but controlled, if I'd done something wrong. I'd noticed you slipping away, that you weren't really with me anymore, even when we were together. I thought maybe it's my fault. I'm too busy, too predictable. He laughed bitterly. I thought our life just wasn't exciting enough for you. Daniel, don't. Anna's voice was pleading, but he ignored her, pressing on. But now, standing here, it's clear as day. He looked down at her, his gaze unrelenting. This isn't about excitement or feeling trapped. This is about choices, Anna. Choices you made that shattered everything we built. His voice dropped to a near whisper. And I don't think I can forgive that. Anna's composure crumbled. Daniel, please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was lost. I didn't know how to tell you. His eyes narrowed, a flash of anger passing over his face. Tell me. So you thought you'd do what instead? Hide away in some corner of our life, meeting this man in secret, pretending everything was fine while I played the fool. Anna shook her head, her voice trembling. It wasn't like that. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this to be. Oh, you didn't want to hurt me. His voice was scathing, cutting off her protest. Well, congratulations. You managed to do it anyway. He took a step back, his posture rigid, as if distancing himself would somehow lessen the impact of her betrayal. The cafe had grown quieter, and Daniel could feel the eyes of the few patrons lingering on them, their whispers filling the space like an accusation. He didn't care. Let them look. Let them witness the unmasking of his life, the harsh reality he'd been blind to. Mark, clearly uncomfortable with the public confrontation, cleared his throat. Maybe it's best if I leave, he muttered, already starting to rise. Daniel turned to him, his eyes like steel. Don't you dare, he said, voice low but deadly. You started this. You wanted her attention, her laughter, her time. He pointed sharply at the seat. You'll stay and see what your little fling is costing us both. Mark sat back down, visibly shaken, his confident demeanor now entirely gone. He looked at Anna, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely remorseful. Daniel felt a pang of satisfaction, watching them both squirm under the weight of their shared guilt. But that satisfaction was hollow, fleeting, and left only the gnawing ache of betrayal in its wake. His voice softened, though the pain remained. Anna, do you even remember what this place meant to us? She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Yes, of course I remember. Then why? His voice cracked, the vulnerability finally seeping through his anger. Why throw it all away? For this? His words hung heavily in the air, each syllable striking her like a blow. Anna's hands trembled, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. For all her regret, for all her apologies, there was nothing she could say to erase what she had done. And Daniel, looking at her now, realized there was nothing left she could say to make him stay. Anna's silence was answer enough. It pressed in on them, thick and stifling, as if the air itself had turned heavy with everything left unsaid. Daniel stood there, staring at her downcast face, waiting for some miracle that would rewind time, make this all go away. But all he saw was the fragile, guilty expression of a woman he no longer recognized. Mark fidgeted, shifting in his chair, as if the weight of the moment was too much to bear. Look, I'm sorry, okay, he mumbled, his voice lacking the smooth confidence he'd shown earlier. I didn't know things were. You didn't know. Daniel's voice cut through the space between them like a blade, cold and precise. Didn't know she was married. Didn't know she had a life outside of whatever fantasy you two cooked up here. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He glanced at Anna, hoping for some kind of support, but she offered none. Her gaze remained fixed on the table, her fingers twisting the edge of the napkin into a tight knot. Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. You don't get it, do you? He continued, directing his words more toward Anna than Mark now. This isn't just about you sneaking around. It's about the fact that you made me feel like I was the problem, that I wasn't enough. All those late nights I spent wondering what I'd done wrong, why I wasn't making you happy anymore. You let me carry that alone while you were here, doing whatever this is. Anna finally looked up, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Daniel, please, I'm begging you. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. Can't we just talk about this somewhere private? He stared at her, incredulous. Private? Why, so you can spin this to sound better than it is? So you can pretend it's just some misunderstanding? He shook his head, anger and hurt twisting his features. No, Anna. For once, you don't get to control the narrative. Mark shifted uncomfortably again. Hey man, maybe you should listen to her. Enough, Daniel snapped, his patience worn thin. He turned to Mark, his eyes cold. You don't get to have a say in this. You've already done enough damage. If you have any decency left, you'll walk out of here and leave us to figure out what's left. Mark hesitated, then finally rose, casting a last, regretful look at Anna. I'll leave, he muttered, barely glancing at Daniel before retreating toward the door. He offered a quiet, I'm sorry, but it was lost in the clatter of the cafe as he left. The door swung shut behind him, the bell above it ringing with a finality that seemed to echo through the room. Daniel and Anna were alone now, the space between them filled with years of shared memories, birthdays, anniversaries, small, quiet moments over cups of coffee, and now, the wreckage of their life together. Anna reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered over his, but Daniel pulled back, the gesture as automatic as it was painful. Don't, he said, his voice thick with barely controlled emotion. Just don't. She bit her lip, the tears finally spilling over. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But please, Daniel, don't throw everything away because of this. I'm still your wife. We can work through this, I know we can. He studied her, feeling the raw ache of her words cut through him. She was still the woman he'd loved, part of him still loved, but now, that love was tangled up in a knot of anger, betrayal, and a sadness that threatened to choke him. He remembered their wedding day, her smile bright and hopeful as they made promises to each other. He thought about their nights here, in this very cafe, talking about their future, dreaming of a life that now felt impossibly far away. But all of that felt tainted now, eclipsed by the image of her leaning into another man, sharing a secret world Daniel had never been part of. He tried to see a way forward, some way to piece it all back together, but every time he reached for it, the image of her laughter with Mark blocked his path. I thought I knew you, Anna, he said finally, his voice hoarse with grief. I thought you were my home. But now I don't know who you are anymore, and I can't live with a stranger. Her face crumpled, a sob escaping her lips. "Please don't say that. I know I hurt you, but I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, Daniel, please." He turned away, unable to look at her, his shoulders tense with the weight of his decision. "I don't think there's anything left to fix, Anna. Not after this." He took a deep breath, feeling the finality of the words settle into his bones. "I'm done." She reached out again, her desperation palpable. "Daniel, don't leave me. Please don't." But he stepped back, keeping the distance between them. He could see the barista watching them from behind the counter, could feel the eyes of the other patrons lingering on them, but none of that mattered. His world had already crumbled, and all that remained was to walk away from the ruins. Without another word, Daniel turned and left the cafe, the bell above the door ringing once more as it swung shut behind him. He stepped out into the cold night air, feeling the sting of it against his face. His heart ached, a hollow pain that settled deep in his chest. But as he walked away, leaving behind the woman who had been both his love and his deepest hurt, he felt something else, too, a sliver of relief, the faintest hint of freedom. He didn't know what came next, but at least he knew that whatever it was, it would be honest. It would be his. And as he disappeared into the night, leaving behind the warmth and light of the cafe, Daniel promised himself that he would find a way to rebuild, even if he had to start from the pieces of a shattered heart.